Welcome, everyone, to the Dominator, episode 11. I'm your host, as always, Josh Larky. Joined with me, my good friend, former coworker at the 33rd team. He's been at Establish the Run since its inception, Ryan Reynolds. Ryan, how are you doing? I'm excited for this show.
Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to this for a while. Glad we're kicking it off with the schedule release.
Yeah, this is one of your areas of expertise. Dare I say you are one of the best out there when it comes to understanding the micro edges in the schedule. We're going to get all into it. We're going to talk about what the implications are for just general NFL football. We'll have a little bit of that talk. We're also going to discuss very specifically the weeks 15, 16, 17, where it's the best ball tournament finals for things like underdog fantasy, and where if you're just playing regular good old fantasy football, you also want to understand your fantasy football playoffs. And we're going to have a big announcement. We've been teasing this for a while. We'll have a big announcement in the middle of the show. But first, the most probably important question: what was your favorite schedule release video? These all came out yesterday.
So let me get this straight, dude. We haven't done one of these in 3 months, and this is the kind of shit you're going to ask me? Like, dude, the schedule release came out. I stayed up all night betting on things, grinding out, like, where are the holes here? What can I bet on early? I haven't watched any of these yet. That said, I will say this to you, Josh. I'm looking forward to checking out the Chargers one the most, because in previous years,
good.
that was always real sharp. It was good.
Yeah, it's worth it. The I will tell you my favorite, and you're going to also like this because you don't have a lot of time on your hands for stuff like this, as you mentioned. The Dolphins schedule release video is hilarious. It's like this is the fastest NFL schedule release video for the NFL's fastest team, and it's like 10 seconds. Yeah. Would recommend anyone out there has 10 seconds. Watch the Dolphins schedule release video. You can fit it into your schedule if you have 10 seconds. It's very funny. Let's get into more serious questions. So last year, you talked a lot about how Bryce Young, the Carolina Panthers, had this really difficult early schedule to begin the season. Sure enough, they struggle out of the gate. And I know you talked about how they'd struggle early, and there was at least a potential for a rebound as the schedule got softer. That, of course, did not happen. They ended the season with the worst record in football, and I think the demoralizing early stretch definitely contributed to that. Give me two teams that you're a little bit concerned about, given how hard that early schedule is, and let's hear some of those opponents.
The first one that jumped out to me was the Cardinals, at Buffalo versus the Rams, versus the Lions, versus the Commanders, which is fine, at San Francisco, at Green Bay, versus the Chargers on Monday night, at the Dolphins, versus the Bears, versus the Jets. That's a brutal schedule. 4 and 6 would be a gift. That said, for fantasy purposes, it might be a good thing because they're playing in a negative game script in most of those contests, but I think they're in trouble early on. The other one that stuck out to me was the Ravens. The Ravens have one of the harder schedules in general, but they start out with at Kansas City in the season opener, versus the Raiders, which is they're going to probably take care of business against the Raiders in decisive fashion. Then they go to Dallas, they host Buffalo, and they go to the Bengals. So that's a very tough 5-game stretch. 3 and 2 would be a positive. 2 and 3 is on the table for that.
I like those. Yeah, that I will say, as someone who bet the Cardinals 13-1 to win their division, that's slightly concerning. Anyway, on a more positive note, let's think like the 2022 Eagles. You and I were coworkers at this time. We talked extensively about how great the Eagles' schedule was. And sure enough, 2022, the Eagles made serious noise. They ended up finishing as arguably the best team in football that year. And it was in many ways part to beginning the season 8-0. Let's hear two teams now where you think they could start off pretty well and kind of almost overperforming what expectations might be based on that early schedule.
I gave you some bad news with the Cardinals for your bet there. I'm going to give you some good news for your beloved Chargers. That stuck out to me. Versus the Raiders, at the Panthers, at the Steelers. Versus Kansas City is obviously a problem. Week 5 bye, I'm not crazy about either, but then it's at Denver, at Arizona versus New Orleans. 1 or 2 losses to that stretch is, very doable. They could get off to a fast start in Jim Harbaugh's first year. Now, the second one, everyone seems to be already tired of hearing about the Jets. The Jets open up pretty well. You get at San Francisco. So if you're going to bet a Jets future, I'd probably wait until that game's in the books, because starting in week 2, at Tennessee, Thursday versus the Patriots, versus the Broncos, versus the Vikings, versus Buffalo on Monday night is a little bit dicey. And then at Pittsburgh, at New England. So that's a pretty manageable schedule. They could get off to a pretty hot start themselves.
Yeah, I always like when some of these lesser opponents are the road games where you already have to be a little bit concerned about the road game. So the Jets getting at Pittsburgh, we have to like that one, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I think either of those look like pretty favorable matchups right now when it's Aaron Rodgers on the other side. Now, before we dive into the rookie quarterbacks, because I think it's important to understand what those expectations should look like, especially when we had a season like last year when it's Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud. Before we get into that, I'm just going to make the announcement. People just want to know. It's been about 6 minutes. Folks, Ryan will officially be doing rankings and podcasting for Player Profiler. This will be in addition to Establish the Run. So you're going to be able to find him on 2 different major platforms. It's very, very exciting. Everyone that knows me knows how highly I think of Ryan. What he does with schedule analysis, the way that he talks about betting, the way that he talks about fantasy football. Just there's so many aspects of your analysis that are unique. You've watched every snap of every game since 2014. I don't know many people out there that have done that and also have a 6-figure betting bankroll that are also in a dozen fantasy leagues each year. You just have such a unique blend of experience. And I know that the Player Profiler audience is going to really grow to enjoy all your work if they don't already know it and if they're not already familiar. And Ryan Reynolds, NFL, is that still the Twitter handle?
That's still the Twitter handle, pal. Yeah.
You didn't have to do like the PFF thing when you went back to Establish the Run, where PFF is like put the underscore PFF or else people won't remember who you work for. We didn't have to do anything like that.
No, I just stuck NFL in there so I can be generally neutral long term. A little bit of forward thinking there. Maybe you should have used the pen name, considering one of the most famous people on the planet is named Ryan Reynolds. But I did see the NFL thing.
Yeah, you didn't want to go with Ryan Reynolds, actor on Twitter.
Yeah. Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool. Yeah, couldn't go with any of that stuff.
Let's turn back to these rookie quarterbacks. We get more of the Zach Wilson, Bryce Young, Trevor Lawrence rookie seasons than the Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud rookie seasons. I think we have to remember that. We have to start the conversation with that. And just remembering that most rookie quarterbacks don't succeed as a rookie. Not that most of them are going to fail overall, but just at the very least, year one, it is usually not very pretty. Like I think Trevor Lawrence's career outlook honestly looks fine. I think we both say he's in line for a pretty big extension, but that rookie season was pretty rough. And there's a lot of quarterbacks that we see have that. Now, let's start with, there's 6 quarterbacks. They just went round 1 of the NFL draft. We'll begin. I want you to basically give me a take, just a rapid fire. Here's how I see their rookie season playing out. And then if you have any thoughts on how that affects the rest of their career, since I think it's important to be reasonable, because right now we've had a ton of positivity surrounding all these players for the most part. And not that we're going to be exclusively negative, but let's be realistic. Caleb Williams, the Bears take him pick 1. He gets this historic supporting cast. Does that get you excited? Does that matter to you in terms of how you're viewing him and his situation?
Yeah, I don't think I can comply with the rapid fire with Caleb Williams. I can do it with everyone else, but not him. One thing I told you before the draft was if I was the Bears and Washington came to me with a trade, I think I would have turned down 4 first-round picks. I think Caleb Williams his ceiling is ridiculous. One of the best out-of-structure players ever. It's a question of can he play better in structure in the NFL? And like you said, they have a wonderful supporting cast. I think if Caleb Williams even has an average rookie season, the Bears are a potential playoff team. And I think if he does anything beyond that, like they could even win a game come January too.
I like that. Now, let's talk real football for a second. So one thing that I've always said in terms of sometimes people are like, what do you mean by like a quarterback performing well out of structure? The way that I've always framed it, let me know if you want to modify or add on to this, is out of structure. Essentially the defense could win, in quotes, win. They pressure the quarterback. The receivers are covered. If a quarterback's able to create for themselves, scramble outside the pocket, make that throw on the run, you've essentially turned what looks on the surface like a defensive win into an offensive win. Is that kind of how you'd frame it as well?
Yes, I think that's great. Like, for instance, Jared Goff's a pure pocket passer. He has very limited out of structure ability. A guy like Caleb Williams adds positive plays with his ability to, if he gets pressured, he can break it outside and maybe even hit you with a deep one. So it's just like it's another thing defensive coordinators have to worry about. And it's another positive that it can bring to your offense, especially for a young guy like him.
So we always talk about how Patrick Mahomes is a great out of structure quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. Is there anyone else that you'd want to add where if someone's watching the 2024 NFL season, they're watching on Sundays, any other quarterbacks that you think are either underrated creators or just deserve to be in this conversation of top 5 in this area?
I mean, off the top of my head, Justin Herbert's really good at a structure. Kyler Murray's also really good at a structure. In fact, player comp wise, I feel Caleb Williams is a bit of a mix between Rodgers and Kyler Murray. He's faster than Rodgers, but it's a very exciting mix. I think Lamar Jackson is not a traditional at a structure player, but he's just so fast and he extends plays like, Michael Vick's really the only other guy in the history of the game that you can parallel to him. So that would be my top 5 for at a structure players.
I like that. Folks, it's rapid fire. Jaden Daniels, he goes pick 2 to the Commanders. How do we feel about this?
He reminds me a bit of RG3 stylistically. He's a guy that I think can potentially carry an offense. He takes brutal hits as a runner, though, which he needs to stop doing if he's going to, be active.
Yeah, he's skinny.
Yeah, he's you can't be taking hits from 240-pound linebackers when you look like him. But I do think he's an offensive rookie of the year candidate. Good, interesting fantasy player because he's a dual threat guy. Offensive line's still a little dicey in Washington, though.
I talked on the Player Profiler draft stream about my concerns with Drake Maye going pick 3 to the Patriots. And a lot of that for me stemmed around the Patriots landing spot. Are those your thoughts, or do you have actual concerns with Maye himself?
Yeah, I hate the landing spot. New England has a, bottom 5 roster. I don't think losing Bill Belichick's going to be a positive either. My biggest concern with Maye is he's young. That's the best thing I'd say about him. He's a young athlete, but okay, so is Trey Lance. I wasn't really crazy about Trey Lance. He's better than Trey Lance physically, but the comparisons to Josh Allen. Josh Allen's one of the 10 most talented quarterbacks maybe ever. I've seen little to no Josh Allen and Drake Maye's game, so I think it's more like Daniel Jones, Trey Lance territory for me on Drake Maye.
Michael Penix, he goes pick 8 to the Falcons, and I think a move that surprised literally everyone watching the draft, including it seemed like Falcons ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I like them more than most coming into the draft. A few days beforehand, our guy Chris Farley asked me what I thought about him as the Giants taking him. I was like, no, I like Penix more than most. His skill set's actually like Daniel Jones, fast, accurate, trouble managing pressure, but I'd rather him be someone else's project than the Giants, for instance. Pick 8 to the Falcons. People are talking about the Green Bay method. They took Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers in the 20s, not at pick 8. So he's also 24. So if you're going to make him sit for 2 or 3 years, it's just from an organizational standpoint, I think it's a little thin, but I do actually genuinely think he can be good long-term, and especially as a fantasy asset, because he can run too.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we hit JJ McCarthy, a quick note on the Falcons. Is this going to affect how you handicap Falcons games? The fact that Kirk Cousins wasn't aware of this pick, this locker room dynamic, I know we just talked about Chris Farley, and Farley is a huge, let's bring psychology into this. Do you care at all that there's a potential quarterback competition, or just that Kirk Cousins was probably not excited on draft day about this move? Or do you just say, you know what, that just means that Kirk Cousins will play very well because he has to?
I think he'll be fine. I do think it adds a little pressure on him, but they did just pay him an absolute, mountain of money. So I think he's fine. Kirk Cousins is an excellent businessman. Let's just say that.
That's kind of where I was thinking. He has 3 guaranteed years.
Yeah.
He's got plenty of time. This is just an elite supporting cast.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about a team that he used to play for. The Vikings, they took JJ McCarthy at pick 10 with a slight trade up. How are we feeling about this?
So my comp for JJ McCarthy is if Alex Smith and Case Keenum had a baby, it would be JJ McCarthy. He was mostly a game manager at Michigan, good runner actually, good instinctually. I told you this recently. I watched a number of his throws, and he had 5-6 throws that could have been interceptions that were missed by a hair. So if he starts on opening day and he had 15 interceptions this year, it wouldn't surprise me. That said, this is a situation where, again, he gets a wonderful supporting cast, an abnormal supporting cast for a first-round rookie. I do think he can win there long-term. We'll see fantasy-wise. I think he'll be fine fantasy-wise this year.
Over under 2.5 Sam Darnold starts for the Vikings.
Ooh, that's good. I'm actually going to go over.
Oh, I was thinking that you might go under when I gave it 2.5 instead of 1.5.
Yeah. I think it will be 3. I think it'll be 3 for me. I think 2.5 was actually the right number, John.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually think Sam Darnold will at least start opening day. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I obviously could be wrong there, but it feels like a situation where we actually talked about this about a year ago with Mike Tannenbaum regarding Sam Darnold and the Niners, and
Yeah.
that the contract he signed was so early in the offseason last year and so small
Yeah.
that Mike was saying, I think Sam signed here thinking there's a slight chance he can start.
Yeah.
And and then obviously Brock Purdy's recovery was ahead of schedule. And I kind of got the same sense with the Vikings where it seems like he knows he's on the cusp of being able to at least get another tryout with the team where he's not, I would say, like, it's almost like he's not quite in the career backup bucket yet is how I view him.
Yeah.
Or he's close, but like he's teetering. He's not
Yeah.
quite there yet. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we're kind of aligned there.
Mm-hmm.
Last one, Bo Nix, he goes pick 12 to the Broncos.
This is one that, like, I kind of like Bo Nix, but I'm not sure what his professional, trajectory is here. I think pick 12 was a little early. That said, Sean Payton's the kind of guy where if this is the dude he wants, I trust him more than a lot of other people. So I could see him outperforming expectations early on. That said, the Broncos have a pretty brutal roster right now. So I could see them shelving him for a while and then maybe he plays late. So fantasy-wise, in Dynasty, I'd probably be looking to buy him if I could get him cheap. But for this particular year, my expectations are pretty limited.
That's kind of how I feel about him too. Folks, we're going to be talking about weeks 15, 16, 17 shortly. Obviously, this is crucial for best ball tournaments. For those watching the live stream, thank you. Welcome in, watching on YouTube. Hello. You can see the shirt. I am wearing an Underdog Fantasy shirt. Let's hear from the Podfather about the best ball platform on the market.
This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly, especially now. It's Best Ball Mania season, baby! Best Ball Mania 5! I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems. But they have the NBA pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the offseason. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld. And go draft your ass off.
Go draft your ass off. We are going to be talking our asses off about the schedule. And I am here with none other than Ryan Reynolds. We announced earlier in the show, for those that missed it, Ryan will officially be doing rankings podcasting for Player Profiler. Stay tuned. Make sure you're following him at Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter to sort of learn more about when exactly that's happening. He's one of my closest friends in the industry. I couldn't be more excited to once again be a coworker of his. Now, before we hit weeks 15, 16, 17, since that's what everyone's here for, we have to tease it just a little bit longer. Let's talk about a few offenses just in general that underwent some very big, very interesting changes this offseason, because I think that should help us kind of frame how to view these teams. And I love that you wanted to talk about the Chiefs. The Chiefs were, I would say, one of the 3 or 4 most frustrating teams for me to watch last year. I know you mentioned this as well a lot, that it was just painful to see what the supporting cast around Mahomes looked like. And it seems almost like that couldn't be farther from the truth, where we're heading into this next year and the optimism surrounding this offense that was pretty much the highest scoring offense year after year until last season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to actually start with Rashee Rice. Usually I buy the dip in these situations because how these suspensions usually work is you don't usually get suspended in the year the event happens. It usually happens the next year. But since he went and doubled down, I'm kind of staying away from him. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But that opens the door for Hollywood Brown a little bit. Travis Kelce's what, 34 years old, Josh? Is that the official age?
He turns 35 in October. Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that Taylor Swift has made that, he's really like a 28-year-old man now. It's possible that she's helped in that regard. But Hollywood Brown, 2 years ago when Kyler Murray was healthy and DeAndre Hopkins was out, he was getting 10 targets a game. I've always loved Hollywood Brown. It's very clear with him and Xavier worried that Andy Reid and company are trying to stack speed again. They tried to do this with McCole Hardman, which didn't really pan out, but Hollywood Brown's actually a really good player. I love
Yes.
Hollywood Brown in best ball.
Yeah, me too. That's one of my highest exposure players. I know that our good friend Jordan Vanek also very much in on Marquise Brown. Anytime he likes a wide receiver, we're obviously listening. I like that the three of us independently are starting to circle around Marquise Brown. I actually bought him in Dynasty for the 201 in a Superflex league. I just kind of thought, you know what? I want to win this year. I think Marquise Brown will be starting for this team. It's like 26, 27. He's still pretty young. And I thought we're just going to pull the trigger on what like is a legitimate case to be Mahomes' top target earner this year. Very exciting. Your beloved New York Giants. And I say that slightly sarcastically.
Yeah.
There's some optimism here. Talk us through why last year it was hopefully the trough for this new team.
Well, let me say this, Josh, because I've hedged a little bit with those uniform releases. Those are disgusting, disgraceful uniforms. I don't know what
Awful.
Like, that had to be approved. Like, how do you approve that? Just where do the Giants have tan and their colors? Like, what is going on here? Anyway, that absent of that, you know, I hated Dave Gettleman, and I actually mean the word hate. Like, not only was he a terrible general manager, but he also was like kind of a dick. You know, so like but Joe Schoen's taken over. All of a sudden, 3 years ago, the Giants just had a running back, Saquon Barkley. Was okay. That's like the only thing we can talk about that's positive here. Now, with Malik Neighbors, they have speed at wide receiver. Jalen Hyatt's fast. Neighbors is fast. Slayton's fast. Wan'Dale Robinson's fast. They're one of the few teams in the league that have truly achieved that. Very young, interesting wide receiver group. The offensive line has some stability pieces now. Good left tackle, getting better at guard. They have a shot to be a league average unit. Obviously, Saquon Barkley to Devin Singletary's, like the actor from Deadpool dropping down to me. It's kind of the drop off you're looking with Devin Singletary. But, I've never liked Daniel Jones. He one of the death sentences for quarterbacks in the NFL is, can you manage pressure? Daniel Jones can't. So that's a concern. Him being terrible last year wasn't really a big surprise for me, but this is, realistically speaking, the best group of pass catchers he's ever had, the best offensive line he's ever had. And like his career kind of hangs in the balance on how well he plays this year. I think I wouldn't call him interesting for traditional fantasy, but for best ball, I'll end up rolling the dice on Daniel Jones at an overweight clip.
I thought the same thing. The second that the team took Malik Neighbors at pick 6, my first thought was, I am going to be overweight on Daniel Jones in best ball, since the public sentiment around him is really like, it's like Drew Lock. I don't think that's the guy that's going to take his job. The people out there that are thinking that, I think that's kind of delusional. Drew Lock has lost, what is this, like 3-4 quarterback battles at this point.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones has actually kind of won all of his quarterback battles whenever they've happened. So I think Daniel Jones, very savvy late round pick. Let's talk about the Eagles. The Eagles, I don't think any team was more disappointing down the stretch last year than the Eagles, where by the end of the season, they were legitimately the number one pass defense to target for fantasy football. The offense looked like they were never on the same page down the stretch. You have optimism, pessimism for what we're going to see this next year.
It's interesting. It's a little bit all over the road for me. Like we've discussed, we both love Joe Banner. Howie Roseman's taken, the reins, and this has just been such a well-ran team for like my entire adult life, essentially. Half of the gray hairs I have are Joe Banner's fault. Kelce retired. I don't know what that happens with the brotherly shove or whatever people call that. Because Jalen Hurts has doubled as like one of the best goal line runners in the history of the league the last few years. I don't know how much that reduces that. The offensive line being a little worse is, a bad thing in general. But, Saquon Barkley's an excellent player. They have the most fascinating RPO collection of skill players that I've ever seen. Like if I was a but just thinking about it from a linebacker's perspective, like you're in trouble, whenever Jalen Hurts stuffs the ball in Saquon Barkley's stomach and pulls it out, like you're in trouble if you're a linebacker. So very curious to see how they do. I do think fantasy wise that it might hurt Hurts and Barkley from a touchdown perspective though.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns, is that maybe one of them just kind of cannibalizes the touchdown, or like kind of monopolizes them, but I think they might just cannibalize from each other, and that suddenly you're like, oh, I've got 8 rushing touchdowns from each of them, and like neither quite gets there. So it's been a tough one for me to figure out as well. Chargers. The Chargers, during the Justin Herbert era so far, I'm pretty sure it's been the pass heaviest team in the NFL on average, if I remember correctly. That is not going to be the case this year. Let's talk about some changes.
I mean, let me actually start with this. The Podfather had one of the better calls last year, talking about Quentin Johnston being, basically terrible, and he was. He's, I've watched so much football now where I can see a handful of snaps from a guy in the NFL and be like, oh man, that's not good. He looked like Kenny Golladay when Kenny Golladay was a Giant last year, most of last year. Now, in best ball, he's going so late, and this wide receiver group is so thin that I'm going to end up having more of them than I should, and that's going to be something that's basically a crater probably in my lineups. But from a macro perspective, I'm a little contrarian on this. I actually think Greg Roman's a pretty good play caller. I'm not sure I'd want him for Justin Herbert, but I thought he was one of the reasons Lamar Jackson had an early success in his career. He played into his skill set. He's fast. He's talented. He gave him easy decisions early on. That's what you should do with a young quarterback. Herbert, I think they're probably going to throw a little bit more than people think, but again, I'm curious about your thoughts on this pass catcher group. I mean, right now, Josh Palmer looks like the most reliable guy, and that's a little scary.
Yeah, I'm actually with you in terms of a lot of people love to kind of poop on this Greg Roman parade. Yeah. Folks, the Ravens, when Lamar Jackson won MVP, had arguably the most efficient offensive season in NFL history. It was like 60% of their drives ended in points. It was absolutely ludicrous. Obviously, Lamar's a different player than Herbert, but I think the idea that you could take a unique talent that the NFL kind of didn't like, as in he fell to pick 31 decisions were made that didn't involve Lamar Jackson's name. And then the fact that this guy had one of arguably the greatest quarterback seasons, one of the greatest offensive seasons of all time. So I actually have some optimism that this team will actually score some points. The way that I've compared it is Russell Wilson on the Seahawks, where there were a lot of years where Russell Wilson was throwing 25 to 30 touchdowns. It's actually a pretty good offense overall, but Russ himself is sort of getting there in fantasy, not because of passing, because of his legs. Herbert isn't quite that much of a runner. And I think we could be looking at those Russ passing seasons where it's 3,200 passing yards and 27 touchdowns, where you're not actually able to start this guy every week in fantasy. And then even in best ball, there's going to be a capped ceiling because you just don't have the raw yardage. I've just attacked all four pass catchers, actually. I want exposure to Ladd McConkey, limited route sample in college, but always very efficient. I want exposure to Josh Palmer. He's put up fantasy wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 type numbers when he starts. I think he starts. He's kind of the weirdly the most proven guy there right now in terms of the rapport. And then with Quentin Johnston, I'm giving him a little bit of a mulligan. It seems like they're going to try to shift him back more to the slot. He is dangerous after the catch. If they can figure out how to just get the guy open or scheme him some touches, he might be a starting receiver with Justin Herbert, and he does go super late. And then I think in best ball, there's few better dart throws with your last pick than DJ Shark. Back-to-back seasons over 500 receiving yards. Another one of these prove-it deals for him. How many guys that go this late that are still sort of in their age prime have a 1,000-yard season on their resume with Gardner Minshew? So I actually think there's a case for all four of them. I think 2, if not 3 of these guys fail. I will say that. But I do think one of these guys is going to hit in a big enough way where you're taking them so late that it actually really helps those teams. So that's why I'm taking some shots. And I think there's a real chance 2 of them end up significantly outperforming ADP. Last team before we get to weeks 15, 16, 17. The Houston Texans. But before we talk about the Houston Texans, I know you and I are so aligned on this. Let's just tear down Stephon Diggs right now, because why would you be unhappy with the second best quarterback in the NFL giving you 170 targets a year? Talk to me about this and how you actually view him and the Texans overall this season.
Yeah, as you can see, if you're watching this, I'm more of a line play guy and a defense guy. I'm not really a huge fan of wide receivers, and this is why. You're in Buffalo, you're with Josh Allen, you're literally top 5 in targets every year your whole career. You've made a lot of money with him, and you're complaining. How is your situation going to get better? Where, I think Nico Collins is a good player. I think people are overvaluing him as a talent last year. I think last year had more to do with CJ Stroud than him, I like Tank Dell, Jordan, to mention Jordan Vanek. He's, if you need wide receiver information, he's your guy. he loved Tank Dell. I thought Tank Dell looked like the best player they had in the skill group. And I think there's a world where if Stephon Diggs ended up being third on this team in targets, it really wouldn't stun me. That said, this team's in a win now position. He's been ultra productive. He's played well in playoff games in the past. I think he's more of a guy who kills bad corners and a guy who, kind of like, you have a baseball past, kind of a guy who hits home runs off fourth and fifth starter, just kind of how I'd frame Diggs. He's good, but like, I wouldn't put him in the Tyreek Hill category at all.
Now, I might be on an island with this. I want to hear what you think. So with the Texans, so many like reasonably sharp analysts think CJ Stroud's ADP is hilarious. They're like, how do you draft a guy early round 5? Do you not realize he doesn't have a ton of mobility? And maybe I'm just outing myself as bad at best ball. I've taken a pretty good amount of these Texans receivers. CJ Stroud, the way I see it is, do we think they're going to be a top 5 offense? Probably. Then when you want exposure, like, sure, like CJ Stroud might not finish as like the QB5 per game. He might finish as the QB7, but best ball, it's a weekly game. We're about to dive into weeks 15, 16, 17. We literally saw that CJ Stroud can score 40 fantasy points in a game, that he can be the week winning quarterback for you with a skill group that before the season began, we were not excited about. And now we know that Nico Collins and Tank Dell are good. We know that Stephon Diggs is there. Dalton Schultz is like perfectly fine. He's capable. Joe Mixon is serviceable at running back. Real chance he's better than what they had last year. I don't see how you're supposed to fade this purely because of, this wide receiver goes at wide receiver 10. I think he's going to finish wide receiver 13. Or this quarterback goes at quarterback 5. I think he finishes quarterback 7. The way I see it is, everyone out there thinks they're a top 5 offense. We should want exposure to a team that can drop 42 points any given Sunday and kind of win you your best ball week. Am I wrong for thinking like that? Or are you also scratching your head when people say just fade the Houston Texans?
I wouldn't say fade. Like, every year there's a team that everyone loves that actually hits, and that looks like it's going to be Houston. Going into last year, I comp Stroud to Dak Prescott, which is like a pretty good compliment, I'd say. And he's already better than Dak Prescott. Like, he elevated his team. They got better this offseason. He's in the spot Joe Burrow was last year ADP wise. So I wouldn't go crazy on him, but I'm definitely not going to outright fade. Like, he's a top 5 MVP candidate. And essentially, to be the MVP, you have to be quarterback in the number 1 seed in your conference. You probably have to lead the league in touchdown passes. He's not drawing dead at that. I'm not going to fade him. I'm not going to go crazy on him though either.
Yeah, I think 45 total touchdowns, very much in the range of outcomes. Folks, we made it. Let's talk some schedule analysis for weeks 15, 16, 17. This is where the money is won in best ball, Underdog Fantasy, promo code Underworld, and fantasy football. This is the easiest question of the day. We have the same answer here. You glance at weeks 15, 16, 17. I think anyone that's already done this activity has the same answer. For those of you that haven't, here you go. The team that just has the absolute nut schedule for weeks 15, 16, 17 is
49ers. Rams Thursday night in week 15, at Miami week 16, versus the Lions on Monday night in week 17, when all the money is on the line. Those are 3 teams that aren't going to have a pass rush advantage on them, with beatable secondaries that have an offense that can push them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
That's how I thought. Yep. Yeah. We like the offenses they're playing against. These are all games where the game total is going to be like 48 to 52 points. Very, very exciting. Let's talk about a few more teams that you're excited about. One of them that I liked is you're excited about the Packers. I've talked about how they are the sneakiest team to actually just straight up win the NFC. Youngest roster in the NFL on offense last year, dealt with a litany of skill player and offensive line injuries, still had a top 12 scoring offense. Jordan Love still second in the NFL in touchdown passes. What do you like about their schedule? What is their week 15, 16, 17 matchups?
Well, you got at Seattle in week 15. I'd call that an average matchup. They're actually 2 pretty similar teams talent-wise. It's just, Jordan Love was excellent last year, so they definitely have the quarterback advantage. Week 16 versus the Saints, I love. The one downside is Green Bay in December 23rd could be, negative 10 degrees, which is problematic. But if we're talking about coaches that are likely to get fired this year, I think Dennis Allen's right at the top of the list. The Saints could be literally reeling in week 16. That could be a bad thing. And then they go to Minnesota for week 17 in a dome. Brian Flores has, done wonders with the defense in just 1 year, but That's another game that I call a variable game. If that game was a bit of a shootout, I think that's possible. A bit of a defensive contest, I think that's possible. But I lean towards shootout. And the truth is, both teams could at least be live at that point. I don't think Minnesota's going to make the playoffs, but their season might not be over going to Week 17 either. So both teams could be motivated as well.
Give me another team that you're excited about.
I'm a Bears bull this year. I bet on Matt Eberflus to win Coach of the Year the day that market opened. We both like Caleb Williams. At Minnesota Monday night on Week 15 dome game versus the Lions Week 16 versus Seattle Week 17. I think those are all games where the game total will be 45 or higher. And again, if Caleb Williams hits, I think the Bears can legitimately be like a 10-11 win team. So I'm excited about that as well.
Are you in the boat that I am and that many people are at this point? The NFC North, is this the best division of football? Packers, Bears, of course, the Lions, who won it last year, and then even the Vikings, which look like the clear worst team. I wouldn't even say are an actual bad NFL team.
It's definitely the best division in the NFC. I think I'd still lean AFC North over them, though.
Fair enough. Let's talk about one more team you're excited about. And I think we're going to have to hit on the quarterback here because getting this guy right is going to be pretty key in best ball.
Yeah, I mean, the Colts, at Denver. Denver's another team that's, if they didn't have Sean Payton, I'd think Denver would be in play for 2 or 3 wins this year. Versus Tennessee, again, I'm not sure why they fired Mike Vrabel. I don't think that really is going to benefit anyone long term. And then at the Giants in Week 17, none of those are wonderful matchups, but those are all matchups where I could see Anthony Richardson potentially going crazy. He's from a fantasy standpoint, like he's a guy who could, run for 100 yards in a game, at least has some capacity to maybe hit 300 in the air a few times. They got better, have an excellent coach in Shane Steichen. So I like just about everyone else, I imagine. I'm interested in the Colts in the playoffs for best ball.
One thing that I like about their division too is obviously the Titans. Yikes, getting rid of Vrabel. I don't think Will Levis is the long-term answer. The other 3 teams in the division, though, you can pretty clearly see how the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, or the Jacksonville Jaguars win 12 games next year. And that's one thing that's very exciting to me. I've been trying to stack up a lot of those teams and add other of those teams in that best ball team as well. So like if I'm stacking the Jaguars, when like Trevor Lawrence is going in like pick 120, which just feels like a gift, you take a Texan early, you take a Colt early, knowing that you're looking at that. It just seems like we want exposure there. Are you kind of the belief that all 3 of these teams could be live to make some serious noise, since it seems like the range of outcomes for all 3 of them has some pretty good high-end outcomes?
Yeah, it's funny. 2 years ago, that was a horrendous division. Now, all of a sudden, it's sneaky interesting, and it looks like it's going to be really good for 10 years. So, yeah, I don't know. I'd say all of them at least have the chance to win 10, 11 games. 12, I think, is possible, but I think that's a little thinner.
Let's now talk about people. They're going to do a 30-second look at weeks 15 through 17, and they're immediately going to see some teams that scare them. Give me 2 teams where the very casual person goes, I don't like this schedule, and where you say, you know what, that's fine. I'm still buying in because of this reason.
Yeah, the first one's Buffalo at Detroit in Week 15 is a good matchup, but at home against New England and at home against the Jets, those are 2 divisional games that could be pretty ugly, especially in Buffalo. Buffalo is one of the 3 cities in December where I'm concerned about weather. But at the end of the day, I still want some exposure to Josh Allen because he's a unicorn. I love Dalton Kincaid. He's, I don't even think he's going too high. I wish he was back in February when he was going like at pick 80. I couldn't stop taking him, but yeah, I like Dalton Kincaid. And, any cheap piece to that offense that I can get, I'm interested in as well. So still gonna take them, especially because like that Jets game, again, I'll call that a variable game. Most of the time when they play, it's ugly. It's like an under 44 type thing. But when you have Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen, things could potentially get out of hand in that scenario too.
I'm glad you mentioned Kincaid. A lot of people out there think it's hilarious that he goes to pick 50. And I'm like, guys, yeah, this could be Travis Kelce, where it's the number 1 target who plays tight end for an awesome quarterback. I don't know if we need to overthink it beyond that. Like how many players out there are going to be playing with a quarterback with a track record of 30 plus passing touchdowns most years and just a hollowed out skill group where they look like the most talented pass catcher? I think the name is Dalton Kincaid. Like it was Trey McBride, and then they took Marvin Harrison, right? I'm not crazy, right? Dalton Kincaid looks like he has a real path to be the number 1 target for Josh Allen at tight end.
I mean, legitimately, when they drafted him, I'm pretty sure, like, if you were a fly on the wall, they would have said, this guy can be our Travis Kelce. Like, we have to beat the Chiefs. What's one of the difference makers they have? Travis Kelce. No one else has one. They're one of the few teams that has a guy that's similar. And like you said, who's his target competition? I think it's almost like obvious that he's their top option in their passing game.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel's just your classic 80 to 90 targets for the season. A few jet sweep type touches along the way. Khalil Shakir is going to have a nice, great 75, 80 efficient targets. There is nothing there, folks. Now let's hit that second team. Perceived bad end of season schedule. You want exposure to them. We had the Bills. Who's one more team?
Everyone loves the Lions, and I get it. I get it. Not sure the long-term prospects is good now. You're paying Jared Goff, you're paying Amon-Ra, you're going to have to pay Hutchinson, Puel. Like, this is what you're going to have the next few years, what the roster is right now. Now, that said, versus Buffalo, that's a variable game. Could be a little bit more defensive in nature, had some scoring potential. At Chicago, the Bears are one of the few teams in the league that have a real shot at being a top 5 defense. Then at San Francisco, it's the same thing. I'm still going to take them. That's not going to scare me away. But it does, there are paths for those games being, 21-17 and the end of the season.
Now let's go the other way. I want a team where people are going to glance on paper and be like, wow, I should probably take more of this team. Look at their end of season schedule. And you say, you know what? Not so fast. My concerns are this. Who is that team for you?
So this is a great question. I think it's the Browns because, the Browns were a playoff team last year. Coach of the year winner in there last season. Deshaun Watson is obviously not still Deshaun Watson. And let's be honest here, Josh. He kind of deserves that, doesn't he?
I don't think there's been a more pleasure, like a more enjoyable root against player the past 2 seasons at this point than Deshaun Watson.
And the playoffs, they play the Chiefs at home, at Cincinnati on Thursday Night Football, then at the Dolphins at home. That looks absolutely wonderful. Those are potential shootout games. The one glaring issue I see is Ohio, Buffalo, Chicago are like the cities where you can have a 40-mile-an-hour wind game, and all of those games are played in Ohio in December. So that doesn't make me automatically cross them off, but it reduces their downside for me, especially like that Miami Dolphins game. Like every year there's a game in Cleveland where there's like 35-mile-an-hour winds and they run the ball 40 times each team. So I could see it being that game.
We just saw that. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when the Dolphins and Chiefs had a playoff game a few months ago. Yeah. And turns out Tua Tagovailoa doesn't play particularly well. The track record of poor play in adverse conditions weather-wise, it seems like it's at the very least a trend with him, probably a real thing. Folks, before I ask Ryan the final question, reminder, promo code Underworld for Underdog Fantasy. I'm Josh Larky. He's Ryan Reynolds. He's Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. He will be doing rankings and podcasting for Player Profiler. Make sure to also check out his work at Establish the Run. Ryan, let's get us out of here. Player or team stack that you think is going to be in the winning Best Ball Mania tournament lineup on Underdog Fantasy.
The one guy I love is Jonathan Taylor. Love the Colts schedule down the stretch. Could see him having big difference-making weeks. But the guy but that's not interesting. He's going in the second round. So I'm going to pivot to Aaron Jones, potentially with a Jordan Love or Christian Watson / Jaden Reed stack in that Week 17 game against each other.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.